I'm ready to talk about the news. I'm Luxander. For today, I have planned a review of the past week of news where I'm going to show you 3 negative news stories and 3 positive news stories. And we're trying to keep things a little bit balanced in that way. I want to check in with you once a week so that you can get like your all of the news that you need that's important and without having to like take the psychic damage of checking every single day, right? We're trying to narrow this down. What's most important? There will be chapters if you want to check down there to go to each story. So you'll be able to see like, okay, this is when the positive news stories start. If you'd rather just skip to the positive news, I don't blame you. And at the end of the show, we will have a call to action segment. So if you're feeling at all defeated or overwhelmed, we're going to have a couple of specific things to recommend. You don't have to do it, but we're going to make some recommendations so that you can engage fruitfully in what's going on in your country. Mostly the advice is for Americans, I guess, also. We are experiencing a constitutional crisis right now. Sorry, I'm not focusing on the UK at the moment. So what I want to start with today is a discussion of the bathroom bans that have been going on all over the country. Numerous states have now passed bathroom bans that say trans people have to use the bathroom that's associated with their biological sex at birth. And we have seen and even discussed it last week that when those laws begin to go in effect, the people who are hurt most often are just women who don't look like women enough, right? And it ends up being like cisgender, butch lesbians, black women, gender nonconforming women, women with short hair, women who are going through menopause. Those are the women who are most often hurt. Trans women are allegedly, that's the point of the law, is to keep trans women out of the bathroom, but it actually ends up hurting cis people, which is kind of ironic given that we have an update from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which has upheld a bathroom ban saying that trans students violate cis people's privacy by being in the bathroom, basically. So the links, as always, are going to be in the description if you want to read any further into these articles. And as always, shout out to Erin in the Morning. If you are not currently subscribed to her Substack, I recommend it because she is working hard to keep us updated on these things, and I reference her frequently. So, yeah, Idaho is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They passed a ban on trans students from using bathrooms that align with their gender identity, and the ruling prioritizes cisgender students' privacy concerns over the harm being faced by trans students. And Erin points out that this effectively strips them of Title IX protections in school facilities, and I guess also contradicts recent precedent, which previously affirmed equal protection rights for trans people. So it's kind of interesting that within one minority group of trans people that you can find that it, like, they deserve equal protection in some cases, but not in other cases, which is, I mean, really, that's just how the slippery slope happens. Like, the point at which it is no longer a slippery slope fallacy and just an actual slippery slope is, you know, you say, oh, well, it's reasonable to say trans athletes shouldn't participate because we don't know whether it's fair. And then it goes, oh, well, it only makes, you know, perfect sense that this is harming cis people in the bathrooms. And, you know, harken back to the idea that black people had to have separate bathrooms because they were violent or dirty or something. Like, it's fundamentally the same situation happening. But yeah, you know, you can get people to agree to one kind of limitation to trans people's rights. And then from there, it's easier to get them to agree to other limitations. So that's kind of where we end up here, that not only are these states passing these laws, but that they are even working up through the courts, being found by appeals courts who have previously affirmed equal protection rights for trans people, now saying that, oh no, it's a problem in the bathrooms. Yeah, no, you're totally right. Slippery slope fallacy posits a series of events with no regard to actual logical causality. Yeah, like, oh my God, you want to marry a man as a gay man? Like, what's next? Marrying your toaster? And it's like, there is no series of steps that make sense between those two things. Whereas what we are doing here is, yeah, as Byron points out, we're following things to their logical conclusion, is just seeing the end of the trail. Like, I can see what you're doing, and it's not like you're not cute. I can see that you are finding new and creative ways to limit trans people's rights. So basically this precedent in the Ninth Circuit says that a, quote, privacy interest in excluding trans students from bathrooms outweighs their equal protection rights, which is crazy. Like, so it basically is this could be citing the 14th Amendment in both. So like that the 14th Amendment right to privacy supersedes the 14th Amendment guarantee to equal protection under the law. That seems insane to me. Furthermore, it stated that not exposing students to the unclothed bodies of students of the opposite sex and protecting students from having to expose their own unclothed bodies to students of the opposite sex justifies barring trans students from locker rooms, changing rooms, and bathrooms. Again, this is just gay panic. Like, I'm sorry if you've already heard me say this a million billion times. This is part of why I'm doing this once a week now instead of like multiple stories across the week, is because I end up talking about the same thing over and over again. That the kind of conversation like, oh, well, you shouldn't have to expose your unclothed body to a student of the opposite sex is exactly the same kind of justification that was used to say like lesbians shouldn't be PE teachers or gay men shouldn't be PE teachers because they might see students of the same sex in a sexual manner, right? Like that justification has been used against gay people before. So it's not new. And if you think that that's stupid and wrong for that situation, like why is it less stupid and wrong for this situation? And yeah, of course, it's worth noting that the language in this law explicitly categorizes trans youth as being the opposite sex in legal terms, which sets a precedent which could further erode protections under federal law. Because then, yeah, like anything that's a sex-based right, allegedly, like they're making all these exceptions. That's the problem. We've talked about this multiple times as well, where something that is normal and okay for cis people to do is being considered bad for trans people to do. So just using a changing room, and again, I don't even need to ask you in the chat or you in the comments, I know, but you can tell me in the comments anyway, how many trans or queer people, you don't have to be trans if you're just queer as well, I'll take both, how many of you changed in the stall when you had to change in the changing rooms for gym or something? Or would otherwise, like maybe you would go, like I had a shower that no one ever actually used. And I might go in there to change because it was like privacy, you know, or like they had a little curtain you could draw. How many of us like know that we feel awkward in that situation? Sometimes before we even know that we're trans or before we even know that we're queer. We're not in there trying to ogle at people. Even if you are sexually interested in the people around you, I don't think that just being in someone's presence justifies like a violation of their privacy. If someone is leering, if someone is ogling, if someone is touching, if someone is licking their lips while they look at you, then yes, of course, that's weird behavior. That's bad behavior. And you can address that behavior without saying that an entire type of person, an entire group of people are not allowed to use public changing rooms. It's not like we're out here dropping trow and just walking around like like we're an old man in the sauna. That's ridiculous. And we're so concerned, about safety. I don't think that safety is being brought up in this particular case, but if you're going to claim it's about safety, then like who is actually being assaulted in bathrooms? It's trans people by cis people. So like cis people are the ones making bathrooms unsafe. Cis people are the ones saying, oh, that woman doesn't look like a real woman. And then male police enter the female restroom. We talked about it last week. Go watch it if you think that I am lying. Like men being sent into the women's restroom to take a woman out of the bathroom who's trying to put a tampon in her body, right? Like this is the situation that you end up creating. Yeah, and it's so interesting too because previous cases, like, so there's this idea called heightened scrutiny where you have to like basically pay extra attention to when minorities are the subject of conversation, like that the situation might be more complicated, essentially. So these cases require heightened scrutiny to make sure that we're not being discriminatory. Yet, despite the recognition that transgender status requires heightened scrutiny, the court still rules that the state has an interest in preventing schools from requiring students to share restrooms and changing facilities with members of the opposite biological sex. Nothing is requiring a student to share that facility. You can create a separate facility for those kids. So here's the thing. When I was trans in high school, if there was ever a question about whether I could use one of the boys' or girls' bathrooms, you did always have the option to use the nurse's bathroom, which if you're in a school with multiple buildings or a school with more than one floor, like let's say you have a class on 3rd floor, and in the 5 minutes or 4 minutes between for passing period, you have to get from upstairs all the way downstairs, all the way back upstairs again, or even just taking that break during class time, you are losing educational opportunities by being forced to use the nurse's restroom, right? But typically this is considered acceptable to marginalize trans people even further by causing them to lose time in class, traveling all the way to the nurse's bathroom. And then like maybe someone else is in the nurse's bathroom. Maybe somebody is sick. Maybe like the teachers or maybe the office staff use the nurse's restroom, you know? And then you're sitting there waiting. So I personally think that it would be a reasonable accommodation for students who don't want to share the restroom with a trans person to go to the nurse's office, because you are the problem. If you have a problem with trans people being in a space that you are in, not staring at you, not ogling you, not touching you, nothing, just being in the space, using it for its purpose, you are the problem. And you can go to the nurse's bathroom as far as I am concerned. But that's not the state's position for the most part. They also claim that this advances privacy and safety objectives and prevents potential embarrassment, shame, and psychological injury to cisgender students. So they do not care about the embarrassment, shame, and psychological injury that it is incurred on trans students when they are marginalized and forced to use the nurse's room or forced to use a bathroom that they are not comfortable or safe in. Because I've covered 2 stories in the past year, and you can look these up. Nex Benedict was a trans boy using the girls' bathroom like he is supposed to under these conservative laws. And he got in a physical altercation with a couple of girls who bashed his head into the wall or the paper towel dispenser. And he ended up dying from his injuries. Now they'll tell you it was suicide, but it wasn't. Anyway, if somebody experiences a traumatic brain injury or like a head trauma, they need to be like kept in the hospital overnight, and the hospital sent him home that night. There are layers of neglect that went into Nex Benedict's murder. And then there was another girl whose name I cannot recall off the top of my head right now, but she was in Minnesota, and she was using the boys' bathroom because she was a trans girl, and she's supposed to use the boys' bathroom under these conservative rules. And a boy punched her in the jaw and broke her jaw because she was in the boys' bathroom that she's supposed to be in according to these conservatives. So like, y'all are trying to tell me that you're concerned about the safety of students, but I mean, really, they care about the safety of cisgender students. They do not care about violence. That was two examples of kids in school doing what conservatives say they should do and having violence met upon them by cisgender peers. So like, what are we, like, this is the thing. You need to look at what is the actual impact of the law rather than like an esoteric feeling like some students deserve privacy more than other ones or whatever. Is like, there are stats. There are recent examples of here's what happens when you have these rules. Trans students get violently harmed when you create this environment where it's okay to marginalize them, where it's okay to exclude them, where it's okay to portray them as sexually violent, like to portray them as like sexual predators. Because that's what you're ultimately saying. Trans people might prey on cis people in the bathroom. That's what they're saying. Oh, this is rich. Okay, so to justify this decision, the panel had to address the fact that the state failed to produce any evidence of harm caused by trans students using bathrooms or changing rooms. And rather than confront this gap, the court sidestepped the issue by creating what effectively amounts to a transgender injury exception, which ruled that common experience is enough to assume harm to cisgender students, stating, SAGA overlooks that this is an unusual situation in which the state's privacy justification is easily corroborated by common experience. So it's just like, if people say that they are uncomfortable, then we're going to take that as evidence that there is a harm. Man, this has been killing me for a long time. And it started with me with, bullshit queer stuff like, oh, bi lesbians are causing harm to lesbians. Like, okay, but demonstrate the harm. If not, you're just claiming that it's harmful as a means of controlling what other people do. Because if you claim that it's harmful, then you can justify being like, so you have to stop. But then like situations like this, you don't actually have to produce any evidence of harm. They'll just assume that there is harm because cis people are more important than trans people, is ultimately what this comes down to. The court sidestepped strong precedent affirming trans people's equal protection rights, including a case which states that the, quote, mere presence of a trans person does not violate cisgender students' right to privacy in shared spaces. But in order to get around this, the court reframed the issue, stating that the mere presence of trans students in bathrooms was not at issue in the case. Instead, the ruling asserts that transgender people are not being discriminated against for their presence, but rather are simply being told they must be treated as their assigned sex at birth, a distinction that functionally erases transgender identity and legal protections. Like, yeah, we're not discriminating against you because you're trans. We're just telling you what you can do based on your sex assigned at birth, which is totally different than discriminating against you for being trans. Like, that's crazy, right? Like, that's crazy. It's like, it's self-contradictory. It's like, we're not discriminating against you. We're just more words for discriminating against you. Like, sorry, my diction fell apart there for a second. But that's, yeah, it's, we're not doing slavery. We just have people work for us for no money. Like, you get what I'm saying here? Like, yeah, so basically this was jacked up in a lot of different ways, and I don't want to go into every single little caveat of it. But again, the description will have links to this article, so please read Erin's work because she takes the time to go into more detail. I'm just trying to tell you what's the most important things from this week, and here's some commentary about why this is stupid. Before we move on to the next topic, please take a moment to hit the like button on the video. It's appreciated, it's quick, it's easy, and it's free. While you're down there, you can also check your subscription settings to see if you've got notifications turned on to see the live streams. But I'll move on now. For our next topic, we have been talking about these legislative attacks on trans people and how they often start with trans youth. And how, like, you know, there is a scientific argument that could potentially be made if it weren't for the fact that all of the data is contradictory to this position. But you could maybe try to make a scientific argument that like kids shouldn't be allowed to transition because it could harm them in some way, right? Again, basically all of those arguments fall flat. I'm not trying to get in on the details on that right this moment, but what doesn't make any sense, I think, to most people, and what is almost certainly government overreach, is the idea that you can crack down on people supporting trans kids socially, which is what we're seeing in two stories I want to discuss today, one from Texas and one from Arkansas, which are going to start, you know, coming after those things. We've already discussed Texas in this context previously in many videos come and gone. Most notably, they tried to pass a law that said you can't give trans kids trans-related healthcare because that would be bad, right? They were unable to pass that law through the legislative process, right? This is how it's supposed to work. We elect these representatives who then do things because we ask them to do them, right? We voted for them so that they would do those things. That process did not result in them getting the result that they wanted. Sorry for the redundancy. It did not get them what they wanted, which was to start criminalizing trans healthcare for kids. So what they did instead was they used executive powers to rewrite the definition of child abuse, which is not something that is overseen through the legislative process, right? That's executive, that's CPS, or whatever the equivalent is, Child Protective Services, Department of Children and Families, whatever it is. That's an executive process. So they just failed to get what they wanted through the legislature, and then they did it through a different means. And then a whole bunch of people in Texas are like, oh my God, I'm under investigation now for giving my kid the health care that their doctor recommended and that my child has expressed that they want and is making their life better. Now, in addition to all of that in Texas, Abbott, who's the governor, now directs Texas to consider investigating teachers who support trans kids for child abuse. So we're again trying to expand the definition of child abuse to now include, using a kid's preferred name at school and getting investigated. An anonymous claim alleging that teachers in Texas might have used a trans student's preferred name and pronouns has invoked the wrath of Governor Greg Abbott and Attorney General Ken Paxton. Denise Bell works with Moms for Liberty, which is, as Aaron describes it, an anti-government, anti-LGBTQ rights group, reading a statement supposedly on behalf of an anonymous complainant, saying multiple teachers started calling this student by a different name and pronouns. This occurred without the parents' knowledge and certainly without our consent. This goes against our Christian faith, the advice of their therapist, and quite frankly, common sense. She ended the speech with a pronounced allegation that HISD, which I think is the school district, is purposely and secretively transitioning minors. Like, you can't, like, what do you mean transitioning minors? Like, is this what the blurred lines are happening where they're trying to say that, oh, this stuff is happening in the schools? And usually they're referring to like, oh, your kid is being taken away. Fucking Trump said it. Your kid's being taken away and they come back a different gender. It's like, do you seriously think that medical care is happening in these schools? But this is what they actually don't want. They don't want kids to have teachers that they want, that they are able to confide in. And this is a huge thing for me that we, comes up periodically on this channel, that kids need trusted adults in their life. And sometimes that person is a teacher, and there's usually a good reason. Like, children are able to discern, minors are able to discern when their parents are not going to be supportive of something. So if your kid is telling their teacher that they're trans, but they didn't tell you, it's because they know that you will abuse them by forcing them to cut their hair or refusing to let them cut their hair or forcing them to wear certain things or taking away their phone or taking away their computer. Kids know. Teenagers are smart. Kids and teenagers are smart, and they can tell. So basically, anytime these rules are proposed that like, oh, you can't even use a kid's nickname without the parents' knowledge and consent, it's basically saying we think parents have a de facto right to abuse their kids into being straight or being cis. Like, basically, that's all that you're accomplishing here. And like, shocker, but children are people with rights. They have a right to privacy. Parents do not have a right to know everything about their kids. Obviously, parents have a responsibility to protect their kids. So I think that parents should be involved in what's going on with their kids to a certain degree. But like, you shouldn't be reading through every conversation that your kid has. Your kid is going to sneak out sometimes. Your kid is going to do things that they shouldn't do, and they're going to hide that from you because they know that they'll get in trouble. And like, that's just part of growing up. I don't know how many of these adults remember being young people and remember like when they used to do things that they didn't tell their parents about. And like, how would you feel if someone was like obligated to tell your parents every single thing that happened with you? Obviously, that would feel like a violation of your privacy, because it would be a violation of your privacy. But so often in these conversations, children are just an object that you can point to say, oh, think of the kids, like this is going to hurt them. Again, not having to actually demonstrate any harm. I think it's because it's assumed in this case, like being trans is a harm, like that if your kid turns out gay, that is a bad thing. So if your kid turns out gay and maybe you could have forced them to be straight, then that's like a net negative outcome. And like, even if you abused your kid to make them pretend to be straight, that would be like a positive outcome, even though it required a lot of abuse. I think that's a really good point. Nadia suggests that these people don't believe in the concept of child abuse as understood by the non-Christo-fascist world. Right. These people are able to twist the concept of abuse because they don't believe that abuse as it actually exists is bad. It's like, it's kind of how they evoke free speech, but they don't actually care about free speech, right? Like, when these Republican fascists get into power, they start cracking down on free speech in the way that we're seeing now with all and we will try to talk about it on this show when possible, but like, there's deportations happening now of, people who had a legal right to be here, but who attended like pro-Palestinian protests. So free speech is not a value that they actually care about. They can take advantage of our value of free speech to say vile things, normalize violence, normalize right-wing ideology. And if we try to limit that, then, oh my gosh, we are now the anti-free speech party, and they can victimize themselves. Like, they can make themselves into the victim. So yeah, same thing in this situation. Like, they don't really care about parental rights because they want to take away a parent's right to get their kid health care, but they are saying that it's parents' rights to make sure that conservative parents can abuse their trans kids. And yeah, they talk about parental rights in this blah, 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 blah. I want to look at Arkansas now because we don't really talk about Arkansas that much. I'm sure that they're still doing a lot of anti-trans things, but it just tends to not hit the news as hard as Texas does. So in early March, Arkansas lawmakers have introduced a bill called the Vulnerable Youth Protection Act, which would criminalize support for the social transition of trans youth. The bill allows parents to sue anyone who affirms a child's gender identity, defining social transition broadly as any act by which a minor adopts or espouses a gender identity that differs from the minor's biological sex, including without limitation changes in clothing, pronouns, hairstyle, and name. Right, so if a kid's name is Alexandria and she wants to go by Alex, that could be interpreted as wanting to use a male name. Or if a boy decides to grow out his hair and the parents don't like that, that could be, sorry, I was highlighting the wrong thing, hairstyle, like literally making it so that getting a haircut could be a crime, or like getting a haircut for a kid. Once when I was a teenager and I was like first identifying as trans, I went and hung out with my boyfriend, and he and his mom drove me around and did some things with me. And one of the things that we did was got me a haircut. Now, I don't think that it was because my parents would not be affirming, but rather that I was treating the haircut as like a fun thing. And like my boyfriend's mom was willing to pay for it, and she liked feeling like she was affirming me. And it was whatever, you know, my parents weren't like mad about it. But the idea that that could have been a crime is crazy, right? Like that if my mom had pitched a bitch fit and said like, oh, you had my daughter's hair cut off, now she looks like a boy. Like, I can understand being upset that your child has made a sudden change without your knowledge, right? Like, I kind of understand it. It's a discomforting thing, right? But for you to go, and now I'm going to sue you for taking my child to get a $10 haircut. Like, I don't know how to help you if you believe that life should be like that. And of course, you know, this particular one also serves as a total ban on gender affirming care for youth, which prohibits both surgeries and hormone therapy for trans minors. But like, obviously we are pointing this out as an egregious overstep because you're also coming down on the haircut thing. And like, how much are the teachers being held responsible for these things? If a child keeps a change of clothes in the classroom, is like a teacher going to get in trouble for that? Like, obviously using the nickname could get them in trouble. Like, I don't know how often a teacher is taking a student to get their haircut, but it's not just teachers though, to be clear. It's anyone who affirms a child's gender identity. So again, my boyfriend's mom could have been sued for this under this kind of rule. Right, like how can you look at this and not see that this is like Nazi shit? Like this is extreme overreach. Yeah, we can't even keep guns out of schools, but let's focus on spare clothes. Yeah, worst timeline. Yeah, like that children can die of gun violence it's like one of the number one killers of children. And like to just be like, yeah, that's fine, but we're gonna crack down on these pronouns. Like again, it's never about protecting kids. That's never what it's about. This bill also goes even further, saying that extraterritorial jurisdiction, like basically lawsuits can be brought against people outside of the state of Arkansas if they are deemed to have helped a trans child transition. So if a parent decides that transition is right for their kid and they go to a different state to get that kid the care, then someone could sue, like the other parent, for example, could sue that parent. Minimum damages of $10,000 per defendant, with punitive damages reaching up to $10 million for those involved in the medical care aspect of this. It's good to know that the ACLU is getting involved on this, of course. The bill is a blatant overreach of government power attempting to control private decisions and to circumvent our constitutional rights, including free speech, religious exercise, due process, and equal protection. Yeah, the party of small government, everybody. trying to say that like your kid you need a permission slip from the parent in order to use a nickname for the kid at school. It just is absurd. Interestingly, and I want to add this as the last thing before we move on, because again, they are trying to usurp the normal rule of law. I'm not saying that our justice system is perfect. I'm not saying that our justice system even results in justice most of the time, but it works a certain way, right? And they're undermining that in a way that is quite alarming on a number of fronts. And one of them is that they have anticipated legal challenges here. And so the bill's authors have claimed this does not violate the First Amendment, despite it having clear restrictions on speech and expression. The bill asserts that if a lower court strikes it down, any higher court ruling in its favor will ultimately retroactively nullify that decision, which means that they would be able to enforce this law even during the periods when the law is deemed unconstitutional, right? Because we've talked about this before, and how it works is some unconstitutional law passes, and then a judge says, no, you're not allowed to do that. They say that law is illegal, and then it gets appealed up to an appeals court, and then another appeals court, and then the Supreme Court, if it keeps going there for that long. You know, like that's a years and years and years long process. And what this is saying basically is that you can't put an injunction on this. If the state court says, yo, this is unconstitutional, then they're basically saying, well, we should be able to keep enforcing the law because we know for sure that a higher court is going to nullify the lower court's decision anyway. And like this provision has no legal standing, according to what Aaron has written here, no legal standing, and directly contradicts long established judicial precedent and overreach that no unbiased court would uphold. Yeah, so we're just doing all kinds of crazy shit. If you want to read that article more, of course, I have it linked in the description down below, and I want you to check that out in further detail because she goes in more detail than I am going in. But yeah, it's just again, I don't think they care about trans people. I think they're just using us as an excuse to usurp the government, like to take over the government. Yeah, why even have lower courts? Why would you even need lower courts, apparently? Before I move on to the next section, I just want to say that this is my job. I do research for these videos. I cultivate my arguments. So if you would like to support the show, you can click down below for a one-time donation on my website. You can do super thanks. You can become a member. You can join my Patreon where, because my birthday is at the end of the month, so from now until the end of the month, you can get 10% off your first month on my Patreon using the code that you'll find on that page. But yeah, please support trans journalism if you appreciate that I'm giving you the news. Thank you. The next story that I want to discuss it's kind of a multi-part story. It begins with Elon Musk, as it feels like many news stories that we hear nowadays begin with Elon Musk. I am limited somewhat in the scope of what I cover on this show. I tend to focus on trans news. When there is less trans-specific news, I will have more opportunity to talk about non-trans specific news, but there just is a lot of anti-trans news right now. Even in the topic of Elon Musk, where we could talk about the gutting of Social Security, and we could talk about, you know, the destruction of our national parks system, but we're talking about trans news. So I scrolled a million billion pages on Elon Musk's Twitter account to find this tweet that I saw a screenshot of from several days ago. Today we're streaming is March 23rd. This tweet is from March 20th, and I had to scroll forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. This man claims to have 17 jobs, and yet he's posting on Twitter constantly. Many of you are aware that there have been protests of varying degree at Tesla dealerships across the globe, not even just in this country. Just looking at France, even. Did you know that in France, speaking to just the other stories that we were talking about earlier, did you know that in France, there is like a council or commission or something that confirms that a law is legal before it becomes law, rather than this bass-ackwards thing that we do in the United States where the law passes and starts hurting people, and then months or years later, we decide in the court system that that law wasn't legal in the first place? Wouldn't it be great to live in a civilized country? Anyway, I thought of France because there have been like several, I think there was at least one Tesla dealership that was just like fully burned to the ground in France. In the United States, you're getting like, oh, there's a drive-by shooting, or there's someone spray paints the side of a Cybertruck, or steals all the tires off the Teslas, or, you know, throws a Molotov cocktail through the window or something. Like these actions are largely like they're destructive, but they're not like wide scale destructive. It's little things. And you can debate whether, because I've seen people vandalizing like some individual person's Tesla. We can argue about whether that's effective or makes any sense, but we've all got opinions about the Tesla dealerships, right? And Elon is really hurt by this. That's not the main story here, but if you look and see any of the recent interviews of him talking, frankly, it seems like he's about to cry about how bad his reputation is and the public opinion. And like he feels like he's living in some kind of dystopia because every day he turns on the TV and sees another Tesla on fire. Like he feels very under attack right now. So because of that, he has started saying things like, so that he quote tweeted someone, and I don't think this is true. It probably isn't, but I haven't investigated. 3 out of the 4 people who've been arrested for vandalizing Teslas are transgender or non-binary. I don't take that claim at face value. And also, I know that the police are going to disproportionately target marginalized people. So you'll find crime where you look for it. There have probably been non-trans people who are doing these vandalisms as well. But his response to that, Elon Musk's response to that is, what are the statistics on trans violence? The probability of a trans person being violent appears to be vastly higher than non-trans. Hormone injections cause extreme emotional volatility. That is simply a fact. So this is of concern because we're entering this period of time where the definition of violence is getting more and more blurry because the people in charge are in control of when that word gets to be used and when it doesn't. Vandalism is not violent. Thank you, Tubian. That was a very generous $2 super chat. Says, I want a cup that says Elon's tears. Fair. I could probably make one and put it in my store. Maybe we'll do a little FOMO run. This mug is only available for 1 week after the upload of this video. So yeah, of course it is troubling when non-violent action is being portrayed as violence. And I guess we've kind of been on this track for a while, considering that fires during the George Floyd protests were being called a type of violence, right? So we're already in an environment where property damage is being portrayed as a type of violence. I personally disagree with that assessment. And obviously, like him saying a trans person is more likely to be violent and he's not citing anything. There's no statistics, there's no link or anything. And like hormone injections cause extreme emotional volatility. Like, I'm sure you know all about that, Elon. I'm sure you have done all kinds of steroids before. Probably, in my opinion. But that is like not, you can't just say that's simply a fact. Okay. Okay, here. Wow, trans violence is extremely far above normal levels, referring to sexual offenses, which of course, like sexual offenses include stuff like peeing outside. That, you know, you could be put on a list for public indecency because you peed outside, or if you're doing sex work because you can't hold down a job. And again, it's a matter of finding crime where you look for it. There have been times in the past in the United States where basically there are laws that are like, if you look trans, people, like the cops will hassle you. And then if you're carrying condoms, they'll get you on a sex charge. Like they'll charge you for prostitution just for looking trans in public and having condoms on you, even if what you're doing is going to hook up with someone you met on Tinder, right? Like they'll get you for street sex work, basically. So of course, you invent crimes, you look for those crimes, and you convict people for those crimes that you've invented. And then, yeah, of course you end up in a situation where trans people are disproportionately represented among sex offenders. Duh, that's how this works. But he's just going here and saying trans violence is so far above normal levels. He again depicts these Tesla dealership attacks as coordinated violence. I doubt that it's coordinated. It seems like you've just pissed off a lot of people, sir. They're calling it terrorism. Attorney General Pamela Bondi, who we will see more from here in a moment, has described this as terrorism. So if you're a person who wants to go protest somewhere, do not do it at a Tesla dealership right now. There is too much heat. I would say protest somewhere else, not at a Tesla dealership, because they will try to get you. If someone does a vandalism, if you're at a peaceful protest and someone does a vandalism, even if it's like later that night when everybody's already gone home, you will be on a list of people who get knocks on your door because they're going to be looking for a terrorist, because that's what they're doing now. calling it domestic terrorism. Again, misinformation, quoting someone who says the fact that transgender activists are so overrepresented in violent terror attacks, such as school shootings, destabilizing street riots, arson against Teslas, gives you a window into why the CIA sponsors and supports so many transgender network nodes around the world. Like, okay, this is, again, like, most alleged Tesla charger vandals have one thing in common: she, they pronouns. Like, turns out you've pissed off a lot of women and non-binary people. But again, I don't even know if that's true. That's just what they are claiming. But this is also just false. Trans people are not overrepresented in any violent crimes. School shootings are overwhelmingly white males. There have been none. I don't see any evidence about destabilizing street riots, arson against Teslas. Like, there's plenty of people who are cis who are doing it too, but they will point to any trans people doing it as like, oh, this is now every trans person's problem. Quoting JD Vance, who says that these attacks on Tesla are acts of terrorism. Yeah, expanding terrorism to include property damage. What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? There's more to this story than just Elon's tweets, by the way. I just wanted to focus on like the fact that he's repeatedly retweeting things that are saying that lighting Teslas on fire is violence and it's terrorism and it's trans people who are doing it, basically. I think you've seen more than enough to show that like the most powerful man in this country thinks that trans people are terrorists. So yeah, I'm just going to leave that there for now. Oh yeah, and just so you know, the president is doing it too. He posted on his social media platform, Truth Social or whatever, people that get caught sabotaging Teslas will stand a very good chance of going to jail for up to 20 years, and that includes funders. We are looking for you. We will come back to that in a second, because I wanted to show you this as well. This is, again, that lady that we talked about, the Attorney General, Pam. So let's see what she has to say.
What about these vandals on Tesla vehicles and dealerships? Give us the consequences there, and what are you learning once they're arrested? Why are they doing this?
Well, you know, we're looking at so much on this. There have been 3 federal charges so far, and I say so far. We are looking at all of these cases across the country. We have a dedicated task force. These are not isolated incidents, as you know, and these aren't vandals. These are Molotov cocktails. You know, that could be a weapon of mass destruction that they're throwing into.
So that's kind of what I wanted to draw your attention to, of like that a Molotov cocktail is a weapon of mass destruction. A weapon of mass destruction is like a very specific definition. Like a weapon of mass destruction, you know, just looking at the Wikipedia, just, you know, top result here, is a biological, chemical, radiological, nuclear, or any other weapon that can kill or significantly harm many people. This is typically like a nuclear bomb or like gassing an entire neighborhood or something like that, like, or like deliberately releasing a virus that has been engineered to kill people. Like, that's what a WMD is. So I just want you to see like the scale at which they're willing to stretch these things. Like that a Molotov cocktail, which granted, yes, it could set an entire car on fire. It could set an entire building on fire. But it's not a weapon of mass destruction any more than a lit cigarette is a weapon of mass destruction, because you could flick it into some dry grass and burn down an entire city. You know, like, even if you did that deliberately, it would not be the same as terrorism using WMDs. Okay, we can listen to the rest of her commentary and then move on.
Tesla dealerships, that they're lighting these Tesla charging stations on fire that are in residential neighborhoods. I mean, it could cause tremendous damages. And people need to know the 3 people in custody right now, they will receive severe and swift consequences, and they are facing up to 20 years in.
So I want to also point out just at the end there that she is an attorney, and in the United States of America, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. So for her to just say she's basically stating the 3 people we have just arrested, we are sure that they are guilty and we are going to punish them severely, which also, it just shows you that these people do not care about due process. These people are not interested in knowing who is actually doing anything wrong. Like, they don't care. The enormous exaggerations that they're doing to try to make this seem like, oh man, they're they're the worst. They're the terrorists. They're using weapons of mass destruction. It's kind of the same too as like the whole Israel-Palestine thing, where it's an organized military with tanks versus like a bunch of teenagers and early 20s kids with rocks that they're throwing, right? The people are making Molotov cocktails shows you how little power they actually have to destroy anything. Because I'm sure if the person who has the Molotov cocktail had more explosives, they probably would have used that instead. But they used what they had to hand, which is to say that like the people who are attacking these Tesla dealerships have so little power compared to the people who own the Tesla dealerships and all the cops that are now being used and paid city money to protect these private institutions. Meanwhile, public services go down the drain. People are closing libraries and stuff like that, you know? Speaking of them not caring about due process, in addition to making comments that, oh, people who are sabotaging Teslas are gonna go to jail, apparently he also suggested that those found guilty of participating in Tesla-related crimes could be sent to prison in El Salvador, which is a reference to the administration's controversial move to deport alleged gang members to the country, to El Salvador, after Trump signed a proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act, even though a court order temporarily blocked the authority. So I'm just trying to bring this in, okay? I want everybody to be aware of like, okay, so Elon Musk is stating that trans people are terrorists and that Tesla attacks are terrorism, right? The Attorney General is saying that these are weapons of mass destruction. Trump is saying this is something that you're going to end up in jail for 20 years for. And, oh, maybe we could even send you to El Salvador, because they just sent like 200 men to El Salvador. And a lot of them weren't even Salvadoran. Like most of these men were Venezuelan, and they were deported without due process, little or no due process. And I don't want to like read this entire article, but I recommend that you look into it. Like what the Venezuelans deported to El Salvador experienced will be linked below. Because, like, it's not great to be sent to a country you've never been to, deported to a country you've never been to, have your clothes taken away, having your hair shaved off, being slapped, being beaten because Trump decided to deport you, right? And, like, I don't have it right this second. Maybe I should have kept that up. But, like, white German people with visas trying to enter the country have been blocked and sent home as well. Like, this is impacting more and more people. Basically, like, the fascism is impacting more and more people. And to kind of bring this home, I want to point out this thread that Zinnia Jones posted. What actually it is she contributed to this Rolling Stone article, but Rolling Stone, I don't have a subscription to it, so I can't read the article, basically. But she found out through publicly available information that the Trump Census Bureau has uploaded and hosted a 51-page document showing all the data sets that they can gain access to and link together, including all these different things. So, like, in context, okay, they're saying trans people are terrorists. They're saying they're saying people who protest at Tesla dealerships are terrorists, that vandalism is terrorism. And this is the data that they have access to. SSA Nubident, IRS 1040 returns, military deployment data, OPM personnel, selective service, postal service changes of address, enrollment and demographics data for dozens of major state university systems, Bureau of Prisons inmates, Small Business Administration loans, state tax data, state driver's license data, the Homeless Management Information System, state DMV citations, SNAP/TANF/WIC clients' individual data and case file, unemployment insurance data, lists of staff at major university systems, and numerous third-party databases, including, quote, notice of delinquency and household member and telephone data, voter registration history and demographic data, credit bureau data from Experian, education data, electronic health records from University of North Carolina healthcare system. And this is just a short list. If you click this document, it is forever long. Like, it's 1 million billion pages long. These are all of the data that the Census Bureau is publicly stating they have access to and that they can use to compile lists of people, basically. of course, the Trump agency is not itself going to say, the Trump Census Bureau is not itself going to say we're compiling lists of people, but basically all of this data is available to DOGE. Like, DOGE has access to these systems that have all this data about people. So like, as a trans person, they probably know that you're trans regardless of if you've had your legal sex changed or anything. They have access to data about like where you live, where you've lived before, you know, your tax documents, your social security number. And like, I don't feel like it's alarmist. And I think a lot of people are accusing Zinnia Jones of being alarmist for pointing out that this is extremely bad. Like that DOGE having access to this data is not a good thing. And this is publicly available, right? This is not like a secret. I mean, of course, it's like a little quiet, like, oh, let me just tell you, you know, there's this document, you know, we didn't publish it like with any fanfare, but it is just publicly available information. So I think that everybody should be careful right now, basically. Everybody should be stepping very lightly. Use an encrypted form of messaging if you're going to be organizing any kind of get-togethers. Get knowledgeable about data security, I guess, because so much of us have like so much, like we have a big data footprint out there, and like there's not much that you can do at this point probably, except be very cautious with whatever it is that you're doing in the world right now, because this data can be compiled in ways that are identifying you down to the individual. Yeah, John points out that DOGE disabled all security at the Treasury for at least an hour, and it's likely that they copied all that data. And even if they lose the right to the data, they will still have copies. Yeah, and we don't know to the extent that HIPAA is implicated in this, like medical records and all that kind of stuff. You know, there's so much information that they just have access to now. And obviously in the context of everything else that I've just said, that's concerning. Because like I said, even if you do everything you're supposed to do, like let's say you leave your phone at home and you go to a peaceful protest at a Tesla dealership, like if you don't wear a mask, which you should, they might be able to use, you know, easy facial recognition. Sometimes facial recognition can't even get you just on the top part of your face, but it's less likely to work if you wear a fucking mask, which you should everywhere you go, for numerous reasons. But yeah, this was such a big story that it's like, I don't even know what to do or say to wrap it up at the end of this. You know, it's like, just be fucking careful, you know, walk softly, be cautious what you're doing. It's hard to just say, I can't just say like, make sure your protest is legal, because they will gradually shrink the definition of legal protest, right? To where if you're doing anything without like a permit from the city, that's an illegal protest, or the subject matter of your protest makes it an illegal protest. You know, all I can say is whatever you're going to do, do it carefully. I think I will go ahead and call that segment there though, because I don't want you to leave here with a feeling like, oh my God, I'm so powerless and everything is bad and there's no solution to the problem. So we're going to have like a little break, and then we're going to talk about some positive news stories for the last part of the show. And hopefully that is good. And we will have call to action at the end. We'll give you a couple of action items for stuff that you can do this week. And hopefully that will have you coming away with a sense of like, okay, I know what to do next. I know what to do with my feelings that I have about what is going on. Because we all have a lot of feelings, and a lot of those feelings are justified. And even if they're justified, sometimes they're a little out of proportion, and we need to do things to calm our bodies down, like flicking water all over the place, apparently. So just don't feel like there's nothing you can do, okay? And it's the middle of the show. Again, if you haven't done it already, hit the like button, leave your comments for any news stories that I missed today that you felt were really important. Let me know what I missed, and I will try to get to it next week. Oh, and I will just say, if you're getting tired of the bog down, I know that I'm about to talk about some positive news stories, but all of that is still in the context of like trans news stuff. So if you need even more positive content, check the links in the description for my side channels. I have 2 side channels. I have a podcast I do with my friend Gayfesh and Demon Mama, and that is all hopefully enough to cleanse your brain in between shows. And don't forget that Sunday stream is when we record these videos, but Wednesday stream is when we chill. So if you want even more of a brain cleanse, come hang out with us on Wednesday evenings. I want to talk about Elon Musk's daughter, piggybacking off of the last one. So Vivian has been talking about her dad publicly quite a bit over the last couple years. I think basically since she turned 18, she's been talking about her dad publicly, and now she's 20. And like every year that passes, it feels less weird to talk about her because it's like you just turned 18 and it feels kind of exploitative for everybody to be talking about you like this. But she has decided to speak out about her father. So she did an interview with Teen Vogue talking about, being Elon Musk's estranged daughter, protecting trans youth, and taking on the right online. Vivian is little introduction. She's like many 20-year-olds. She likes listening to Chappell Roan and watching RuPaul's Drag Race. Yeah, I think the first time I heard about Vivian was she petitioned in 22 when she turned 18, or maybe she was 17 at the time. She wanted to legally change her name so that she would not be associated with her biological father by having the same last name as him. And then she also obviously changed her name. She had a male name that she was given at birth, and she doesn't use that name anymore. This is her second ever published interview with Teen Vogue, this one, saying, "I have a sharp tongue," and says, "When you spend all of COVID lockdown in online communities of queer people who are constantly getting into drama and trying to read each other, you learn how to make a response very quickly, and you learn how to be funny and snap at someone else in a comedic way. Getting into fights with other queer teenagers, that's how you learn how to be quick and witty." That's cute. That's cute. Cute. The author of this article says, much like her father, Wilson is extremely online. Unlike her father, she's really good at it. Fire. That's hilarious. And we're just kind of dunking on how, he's got like 1 million kids and he doesn't see any of them. But fatherhood is a core part of his public persona. So it is really kind of a huge hit to him to have one of his kids coming out and saying how bad of a dad he is. This talks about how Elon Musk spoke about Vivian in a conversation with Jordan Peterson. We did watch that on this channel and talk about it a while ago. He repeatedly dead-named Wilson and claimed that she had been, quote, killed by the woke mind virus, which he said again this week. Like, he has responded to Vivian's interview in Teen Vogue by melting down. And yes, he repeatedly says that she is dead. He refers to her as his son, uses her dead name, and says, "Oh yeah, my son died. He's dead now," which is obviously very unkind when your daughter is finally like living her life in a way that she actually feels like she wants to live. Yeah, so he keeps coming back to this. He's not responding well to this interview that she did. That's part of what we were discussing earlier is like him saying that, the trans terrorists, like I think that it's partially because he's losing his mind about this interview. This is kind of just talking about her personally, saying that Wilson's vibrant life, full of possibility, underscores the life-saving power of gender-affirming care for young people. She's horrified by the wave of anti-trans legislation, of course. Wilson is compelled to speak out on trans issues, saying, "I don't feel like people realize that being trans is not a choice." She continues, "Obviously, it's not just trans people that are affected by the current administration. Marginalized groups such as undocumented immigrants and people of color are affected. And I'm trying to do more advocacy on that front since the current administration has been like a wrecking ball in that regard." Yo, she's just like chilling in Tokyo. She studies in Tokyo. That's great. I love that. They'd ask her about her coming out. Of course, I encourage you to read this whole interview if you want to read the whole interview. Are you and your mom on good terms? Do you consider yourself to be a famous person? How would you describe your relationship to social media? She says, "I am the queen of threads. That's my branding. I have a blue sky, but queen of blue sky doesn't have the same ring to it." Fair enough. Oh, wow. Great question. This Teen Vogue person asks if she is on good terms with her siblings. Vivian says, "That's a question. I will say I do not actually know how many siblings I have if you include half siblings. Just a fun fact. It's really good for two truths and a lie. I found out about one sibling at the same time that everyone else did, and I had no idea before that. I found out about Grimes having a second child because a drag queen posted about it on Reddit." So yeah, like she has so many siblings she doesn't even know because Elon Musk is spreading his seed everywhere like a crazy person. She criticizes right-wingers, saying that they're bad at posting. "You're very vocal online about your politics, but also specifically about your dad. Does that take up a lot of space in your day-to-day?" Oh, I love this. No, it doesn't. It really doesn't. I mean, I'll see things about him in the news and think, that's fucking cringe. I should probably post about this and denounce it, which I have done a few times. The Nazi salute shit was insane. Honey, we're going to call a fig, and we're going to call a Nazi salute what it was. That shit was definitely a Nazi salute. The crowd is equally to blame, and I feel like people are not talking about that. That crowd should also be denounced. But other than that, I don't give a fuck about him. I really don't. It's annoying that people associate me with him. I just don't have any room to care anymore. When I initially did the whole thing, when he came for me, the Jordan Peterson interview, that was the most cathartic moment of my entire life by far. I had all this pent-up energy. I had wanted to speak out for so long after being defamed in a book, after being doxxed, everything that had gone on, especially in my childhood. When that finally happened, it was the most cathartic experience I have ever had. And then I was like, okay, whatever. It's like, okay, now I don't need to think about it anymore. Now that I've said what I needed to say. She is a leftist, not a Marxist, which is fun. Does your transness inform your politics? Do you think your parents influenced your politics? Yes, basically, she says, seeing that kind of extravagant wealth firsthand while living in LA and seeing the huge homelessness problem, the wealth gap, you start to wonder, how is this fair? And you inevitably come to the conclusion that it's not. Asking about has Elon Musk always been like this? And she's like, I am not going to answer that. It's a convenient narrative that the reason he turned right is because I'm a T-slur, and that's just not the case. That's not what that does to people. Him going further on the right, and I'm going to use the word further, make sure you put further in there, is not because of me. That's insane. Yeah, so she's saying, like, he's been crazy the whole time. It has nothing to do with me. So basically, I just thought that this was fun. If you want to read the interview further, I encourage you. Like, I mean, she's just a 20-year-old trans woman, you know, like she's just a young woman who is very in the public eye because she happens to have a crazy and famous dad, you know? So I don't know how valuable, like, what her commentary is on Marx is going to be. I'm not saying that it's not valuable. I'm just saying I'm not here to say, like, Vivian Wilson is an incredible political speaker of our time. She's a queer kid who's good at clapping back when her dad publicly says crazy nonsense about her. And that's just kind of it. And we can appreciate that. Yeah, Elon is really the example of man who would rather do X than go to therapy. And X is dismantle the entire administrative state and foundation of scientific research in the USA. Our second good story from today that I want to talk about is, y'all remember Judge Reyes? You might remember, I talked about this a couple weeks ago on the stream. This judge has been overseeing the whole trans military ban, right? Which the military employs like a huge number of trans people in the United States. So it's important that we talk about this because it affects a lot of trans people. Judge Reyes, so the reason why we talked about this previously was because we talked about the idea of animus. And she was saying this is based on animus toward trans people. It's not based on any real data or anything. And you will probably remember that she made the lawyer go sit down. Because basically the policy, they're saying like, this group of people does not hold with the standards of the military being honest, honorable, and disciplined. So you're saying that all trans people are dishonest, undisciplined, immodest, and have no integrity. And she points out, like, how is that anything other than showing animus? And then because the attorney was from UVA, I can't remember, it's a university, University of Virginia, something maybe, I don't know. But she changed her courtroom orders to bar people who graduated from UVA law school from appearing before her because, quote, they're all liars and lack integrity and are undisciplined and can't possibly meet the higher rigors of a benign lawyer for the government. She then made that lawyer sit down because her courtroom rules say that people from UVA can't present anything to her. And then after he sat down, she called him back up and asked him whether that was a display of animus. So obviously that's really amusing. I'm glad that happened. Update to that is, like, she has now given her actual ruling, I believe. She struck down the trans military ban. Now that doesn't mean that it's done forever, but she basically confirmed this is soaked in animus. There is no way of you could do this, you know, to say that thousands of trans service members have sacrificed for this country, but they aren't good enough to be in the military is, you know, silly. She is absolutely correct on these things, of course. None of these documents presented contain any analysis or data. They just pronounce that trans people are not honorable, truthful, or disciplined. And then defense counsel concedes that these assertions are purely conjective, like just conjecture. She points out that the plaintiffs have cumulatively provided over 130 years of military service, having served in roles ranging from senior military science instructor to artillery platoon commander to intelligence analyst to satellite operator to operations research analyst to naval flight officer to weapons officer. Which is to say that the kind of people, it's like trans people in the military are career military members. Like it's stable employment. Trans people who get into the military typically stay in the military, it seems like. That's why there's a huge number. And they are highly skilled officers. They have high positions. They're specialized, skillful service members. And so it will cripple our military in very important key operational departments to kick out some of your most skilled long-term employees. It will damage our national security, which is not typically something you hear from a leftist, but like that is the case. We have a huge military system and like, yeah, it needs all these highly skilled laborers in order to keep it functioning. So, you know, of course, Reyes points out that the ban is not only discriminatory, but unscientific. She points out these individuals have deployed around the globe. One is presently deployed to an active combat zone, and together they have earned more than 80 commendations. You know, really sink in the idea that this is based in animus and dripping with pretext. Like, there is no good reason to do this that isn't, like, just because we don't like trans people. The language is unabashedly demeaning. Its policy stigmatizes transgender persons as inherently unfit, and its conclusions bear no relation to fact. Thus, even if the court analyzed the military ban under rational basis review, it would fail. Also pointing out that there is no existential crisis, and we have not become less lethal or effective as soldiers become unglued when asked to use preferred pronouns. And apparently evidence submitted to the court suggests contrary, that unit cohesion, recruiting, and military readiness have improved since trans people have been formally allowed to serve in the military since 2021. Obviously, before that, it was just like a don't ask, don't tell kind of thing, where it's like, technically, we don't have a rule for or against this, but then it became explicitly like, yes, service members are allowed to be trans, and now we're seeing this backlash, even though they were serving before that anyway. Sure, I think that that's fair. Jojo Tater says, it seems like it might also be an attempt to remove people who are less likely to follow certain unlawful orders. They're certainly doing that. It seems as though they are certainly doing that. And, you know, it's worth pointing out, I don't have this in my links right now, but it is like the Nazis purged Jews from the military a couple of years before they did the Holocaust, right? Like this fits into a historical context of events. And like that is something that's worth noting. You can very easily look this up on Wikipedia. I am not going to provide a link, but it's very easy to look up like Nazis expelled Jews from the military. It happened in 1933, I want to say. So, yeah. But it's good that this, you know, the judge is doing what she's supposed to do. The system is working the way that it's supposed to. And this article was from last week. Obviously, it's Sunday today, so we're looking at last week's news. The administration had until the morning of 21st to file an emergency stay to appeal Reyes' ruling. They did do that, I believe. Or I guess basically they just said, "Pretty please, will you take off your injunction?" Because, yeah, the U.S. Department of Defense released new guidance that or it's like how it will enforce president's ban on trans people in the military, asking a federal judge to lift her recent order blocking the ban. So basically what they're doing instead is they're going to send out a questionnaire, giving people 45 days to send in a questionnaire, a self-assessment questionnaire to determine whether they have a current diagnosis of gender dysphoria. And basically what they're doing is they're stating that excluding trans people with symptoms of gender dysphoria, i.e. clinical distress related to their gender identity, would apply only to those with the medical diagnosis, which is another reason why, I'm sorry, I take the anarchist position on diagnosing trans people. We shouldn't be medically diagnosing trans people. I know that some people freak out about that because they're like, oh my God, how will I pay for anything if insurance doesn't cover it? Like, what you should be demanding is like a destruction of the insurance system that jacks up prices on things and not like, oh my God, we need to continue medicalizing trans people because that's the only way I can get my healthcare. Like, no, it's not the only way you can get your healthcare. The other way you can get your healthcare is by demanding that they fucking give it to you. Like, sorry for getting real spicy real quick. But anyway, just to say, like, I wanted to do this in the good news segment, and I just wanted to acknowledge that there is an opportunity for them to continue questioning and challenging this, and they are going to continue making motions to challenge this. It just felt like an incomplete story if I didn't add that, like, yes, Trump administration is pushing back on this already by the end of last week. But overall, it's a good story. We should continue to see these things happen where more judges are going to say that the actions of the administration are unconstitutional and that they need to be stayed. Like, there needs to be an injunction. You can't just keep doing this. And our last positive news segment for today, for those of you who have already hit the like button, and only for you, wink. Anyway, so Ohio, we've got all these bills about trans healthcare, especially trans healthcare for kids. And I just wanted to show a positive end of that. Like, obviously we've had crackdowns on trans healthcare, but the appeals court, and this is relevant because Ohio is in this circuit, is like the 11th circuit, the 10th district, Ohio 10th District Court of Appeals, because Ohio has been going really conservative weirdly over the last 10 years, and I don't understand it really, but it's good that the appeals circuit court has said, you know, the state can't ban gender affirming care for trans youth. And it's funny, this is a funny story as well that I want to acknowledge. So first, gender affirming care constitutes legitimate medical treatment, which that's fine, that's not funny. However, second, parents have the constitutional right to make healthcare decisions for their children. This court decision was made possible by Ohio's Healthcare Freedom Amendment, which was originally a Republican-backed constitutional provision designed to undermine the Affordable Care Act. But now that same amendment is being used to dismantle a key pillar of the state's anti-trans legislation. So the ruling obviously affirms what we already know, that this is clinically proven treatment for trans youth. The constitutional amendment passed in 2011 in response to the Affordable Care Act says no federal, state, or local law or rule shall prohibit the purchase or sale of health care or health insurance. No federal, state, or local law or rule shall impose a penalty or fine for the sale or purchase of health care or health insurance. Now, if you remember the ACA, you will remember that this was the basis by which they tried to get it knocked down, was that there used to be a tax penalty kind of if you didn't get health insurance. Like, unless you were below a certain income threshold, you were basically being incentivized by the tax system to purchase health insurance, even if it would be more expensive for you to do that. I don't know, basically like this, but this was the basis. Republicans did not like that the Affordable Care Act expanded healthcare access. They wanted to restrict healthcare access. And so in an attempt to defeat the ACA, they made these rules, like no law shall prohibit the purchase or sale of health insurance, but they also just put healthcare in there. So the conflation of healthcare with health insurance is actually a boon to us in this moment. So because of that rule, Ohioans now have broader constitutional protections around healthcare access, protections which, in this case, worked against Republican lawmakers' attempts to restrict gender-affirming care. In defending the ban, the state argued that gender-affirming care does not qualify as healthcare, relying on testimony from anti-trans medical experts, quote unquote, and asserting that it was up to the legislature and not the courts to determine what constitutes medical treatment. And the judges have rejected both arguments outright, affirming that gender-affirming care falls squarely within the legal definition of healthcare. Oh man, Dr. James Cantor is one of those guys who keeps showing up. I think he's a dentist, and the court said this guy is not a physician, has never practiced as a licensed clinical psychologist in the United States, is not licensed to treat patients under the age of 16, and has never provided treatments to patients under the age of 16. One of the other guys, Dr. Paul Hruz, they said he has never diagnosed or treated a patient with gender dysphoria, and also highlighted his history of anti-trans advocacy. Wow, this is what courts should do. Courts should cite the conflict of interest. He previously testified in a transgender bathroom case where he stated, conditioning children into believing that a lifetime of impersonating someone of the opposite sex, achievable only through chemical and surgical interventions, is a form of child abuse. So I just wanted to bring this up because this is hilarious. It's very funny to me. And that this is affecting a state like Ohio, which has gone insane with the anti-trans and the anti-fucking abortion stuff. Like, wasn't it in Ohio that there was that 10-year-old girl who needed an abortion and she couldn't get it in Ohio? And then she left the state of Ohio. Her parents took her to another state to get her an abortion. And then the state of Ohio still tried to criminalize that behavior. Like, good Lord. I might be misremembering some of the details on that, and I will capitulate that I'm just going off the top of my head on that one. But holy cow, Ohio has been going nuts in the last couple of years, is what I'm trying to say. It's also really interesting, just as we're kind of gonna ramp down now as we're getting toward the end of this segment. But this court case kind of says something that I think is not said often enough, which is that what qualifies as legitimate healthcare is typically not under the purview of the legislature. Obviously, if you practice medicine without a license, that could be subject to criminal activity because licensing is under the purview of the state, right? So like whether you are licensed to practice medicine is under the purview of the state. But like it doesn't typically say this type of treatment is legal and this type of treatment isn't. Like it's mostly just like, I don't even know if decriminalized is the right word. It is not under the purview of the legislature typically to say that one type of healthcare is legal or not. It just is something that doctors do. And there are laws regarding like mistreating your patients or selling them on a treatment they didn't need. Actually, there probably aren't any rules around selling someone on a treatment they didn't need. Maybe if the person dies, you might get caught up in a wrongful death lawsuit. I'm thinking, of course, of like homeopathic doctors who give cancer patients garlic water or whatever. I don't actually know if that's what they do. I'm just, you know what I mean? I'm just saying things about homeopathy and the things that they typically do. So yeah, it's just so interesting. This points out the General Assembly cannot simply declare any type of healthcare to be wrongdoing and swallow up the right enshrined in the Ohio Constitution by direct vote of Ohio's citizens. The court asserted that the state must present a compelling case as to why a widely accepted standard of care should be excluded from the definition of healthcare. Not only did the state fail to make that case, but it also could not provide a single alternative standard of care with evidence of positive outcomes for transgender youth. Slam dunk. That's a good one. Hell yeah. So with all that said, I would like to discuss some action items this week. What are some things that you can do in the current climate? What can you actually do, right? Last week, my suggestion was to show up at a town hall or a peaceful protest in person. This week, I'm going to suggest something that you might find a little bit easier. Go to 5calls.org, the number 5calls.org, and type in your zip code, and it will provide you with a list of topics on one side of the page. And once you click on that topic, it'll give you a little script for what to say, and it will help you contact the people that are representing you directly. It'll show like, this is your senator, this is your representative in the House, these are the people you need to call, right? Whatever the issue is, maybe because you're here, the issue is trans healthcare, or maybe the issue is Elon Musk and DOGE and their illegal actions in the federal government, right? Pick your issue, whatever it is, read the script, and if you can, I'm gonna recommend that you call rather than leave an email, because calls seem to be slightly more effective than emails. Showing up in person is more effective than either of those, but all I'm saying today is leave a message for one of your representatives, and you can either thank them for the work that they have done opposing, if you have a Democratic person who is like doing good things, you can thank them for opposing the harmful things happening. You can pressure them if it's a Democrat who has voted in a way that you think is stupid, or if it's a Republican, you can say, you represent me just as much as you represent the Republicans who voted for you, and I would like to state my opposition to the stuff that is going on. So whether or not you feel like it's going to make a difference, You have to get in the practice of doing something. Get in the practice of doing something, and you will be building toward a greater momentum for tomorrow. As a secondary thing, I would also suggest doing the same thing that we did last week, which is choose one social media and don't go on it for one day. Maybe Twitter is really toxic and harmful for you, and so you just pick one day this week to not use Twitter. You can still scroll Instagram if you want. Just pick whichever one is the most toxic for you, and just don't get on that one social media for one day. And we're going to see if this has a cumulative effect where we feel more and more peaceful in our lives the less we consume this knowledge, right? Keep informed to a reasonable degree. That's why you're coming here, to stay informed to a reasonable degree, but then allow yourself to turn off your brain. Once you make that phone call, you can log off for a couple days, okay? You will have done something, and it will be part of a larger movement, part of a larger course of action that we're taking, all right? That's my suggestions to you for this week. Yeah, you're welcome, Gay Fesh. Fesh is like, I check Twitter maybe once every week or two, so all you did was to remind me to check Twitter. If you're already not on Twitter, whatever, I'm just saying, let's try to identify where is the toxic element in our lives. I have to limit my time on Blue Sky, even though I love Blue Sky, because there's just a ton of news there all the time. When I go to Blue Sky, I go to the gardening feed and I look at gardening posts, right? So we're trying to find ways to make sure that we're staying sane. So those are your action items for this week. If there's anything I missed this week that you think I should really talk about next week, leave it in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share this video, and check out the links in the description if you would like to support the show directly, whether that's a financial donation or whether you just want to follow me on another social media platform, or if you want to follow my other channels and see some other things that I'm going to be working on. Oh, hey, by the way, I totally did make a mug that says Elon's tears on it, but it's only available for 1 week. Go get one if you want one. Of course, on the Patreon, I'm posting more often. Oh, also memberships on YouTube. $5 a month gets you some of the same stuff that you get on Patreon, just on YouTube instead of Patreon. So with all that said, I'm going to wrap up the news part of today's stream. Thank you all for watching. Thanks to the patrons, and I'll see y'all next time. Thank you so much to my patrons for supporting me as I've gone through so many changes the last few months, especially Tiago Nascimento, Mersh Rolvag, In a Box, Sarah A., Michelle Frateroli, Wellington Marcus, Michelle Winter, Danielle McDonald, Mr. Atheist, DZXN, Kevin Young, Liam Hodgson, Suzanne Maynard, Jamie Jam, Nova, Desi Quiche, Amanda B., Celeste, Athiette, Sojo, LV Nobody, Nadia Yvette Chambers, and Ing Marie.